The train beyond the mist, the rain that wouldn't end. It had been raining for 7 hours straight. The streets of Lantern were empty, except for a single man walking without an umbrella. His coat was soaked through, and water slipped from his hair down to the collar of his shirt, yet he didn't seem to mind. His name was Eliot Crane, age 39, no family, no job, at least not anymore. The world as he knew it had slowly unraveled over the past year. First, the company he worked for vanished in a cloud of lawsuits. Then his apartment lease ended without renewal. And finally, last week, the woman he thought he would marry returned her ring without a word. Now, Eliot walked aimlessly, hands in pockets, unsure where to go, driven by some instinct that even he couldn't explain. He didn't want to be anywhere familiar. Familiar places demanded explanations, and explanations were like weights he no longer wanted to carry. At the corner of Waverley and 3rd, he paused. There was an old train station here, Harrow's End, abandoned years ago when the new metro line opened downtown. Most people had forgotten about it. The glass windows cracked, the signage faded to ghostly gray. But tonight, in the silver wash of moonlight through the rain, Eliot saw something he hadn't expected. Light. Soft golden light spilling from the platform windows, and smoke, actual smoke, rising from behind the structure. He blinked. Could it be some restoration project? A film set? Curiosity, quiet but insistent, pulled him forward. His shoes squelched with each step as he crossed the street and made his way to the iron gate. It was open. That was the first surprise. The second came as he stepped onto the platform and saw the train. It was real. A long silver-bodied engine with dark green velvet interiors glowing under the old-fashioned lamps. It looked freshly polished, almost too perfect. A conductor in a dark uniform and white gloves stood beside the open door holding a lantern. Eliot stared. The conductor nodded as though he had been waiting. Without saying a word, Eliot climbed aboard. The conductor who knew his name. Eliot stood just inside the carriage, his clothes dripping gently onto the marbled floor. The scent of something familiar drifted through the air, old books, wood polish, and a faint trace of lavender. The conductor, a man with a lined face and thoughtful eyes, stepped closer. "Cabin 3, he said quietly. "Your belongings are already inside." "My belongings?" Eliot's voice was rough, unused. The man gave a small nod as though the question was expected. "You've brought more with you than you realize." And with that he turned and disappeared through the next door. Eliot hesitated, then began walking down the narrow corridor. The train moved under his feet, not violently, but with the steady grace of something that had been in motion long before he boarded. The hallway was lit with golden sconces, each one flickering with a gentle flame. There were no sounds of engines, no rattling of wheels, only the soft hum of something that felt ancient, benevolent, watching. Cabin 1, cabin 2, then cabin 3. He opened the door. Inside, the cabin was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Soft gray walls, a leather-bound journal on the desk, a steaming cup of tea resting beside it as though poured minutes ago. A coat, his coat, was hanging neatly on the hook, but he had never removed it. The train knew him. He sat down slowly, eyes scanning every detail. No windows, he noticed. Only a single brass clock above the door, its hands spinning slowly backwards. A knock. The conductor again. "Dinner is served," he said. "You may dine in the observation car or have your meal brought here." Eliot rose. "Observation car," he answered. He didn't know why. He just felt he needed to see whatever there was to be seen. The dining car with no time. The observation car was a work of craftsmanship from another era. Panoramic windows lined both walls, though the outside showed only fog. Inside, velvet booths and mahogany tables stood in near silence. A handful of passengers sat in corners, speaking in hushed tones or simply gazing into the gray beyond. Eliot took a seat near the center. A waiter approached wordlessly and placed a tray before him. Roasted vegetables, warm bread, a bowl of stew. No menu, no choice, but it smelled like home. He glanced to his left and saw her, a woman in her 70s, hair in a neat braid, wearing a red cardigan and gloves with the fingers cut off. She was staring at him with a calm, curious expression. "I remember you," she said. Eliot blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You're the boy who sat in the back row. 3rd grade. You never raised your hand, but you always knew the answer." He studied her face. And then he saw it. Miss Langford, his 3rd grade teacher. But that was 28 years ago. "You can't be—" She smiled. "We're all just passengers, Eliot. The train doesn't forget anyone." First stop, the library that burned. The train began to slow. A gentle chime echoed through the carriage. First stop, a voice whispered over the speaker. Ashmore Library. Eliot stood instinctively. He didn't know how he knew the name, but something tugged at him deep in his chest. The doors opened. He stepped out into mist again, but this time it was warm, familiar. The Ashmore Library had burned down when he was 12. He'd been inside when it happened. He remembered the fire alarm, the smoke, the fear, but he never spoke of what he'd gone back for, a book, The Lost Kingdom of Galarath. It had his name written inside. Now he stood before the same building, fully restored. He walked in. Inside, time bent. Shelves stretched impossibly high. Lanterns floated mid-air. A librarian at the far desk looked up, nodded once, and disappeared. He found the book. It was there on the 3rd shelf, just where he left it. He opened it, and a small photograph fell out. It was of him and his father holding hands at the lake, a moment he had forgotten, a moment he thought was lost. The photo shimmered, then faded into the page, and the book was gone. A whisper. What you hold on to returns only when you let it go. The man in the mirror. Eliot returned to cabin 3 in silence. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding nothing in his hands, and yet he felt heavier than when he had arrived. The photograph, the book, the librarian who wasn't there. Everything was familiar, and yet none of it could be explained. Above the desk, a mirror hung quietly. It hadn't been there before. He stood and stepped toward it. The reflection was his, mostly, but something was wrong. The version of Eliot staring back was younger, 25 maybe, confident, wearing the same gray suit he had once worn on the day of his promotion, when his parents were still alive to congratulate him. The mirror. Eliot tilted his head. "You thought success would feel better, didn't you?" Eliot didn't answer. "You were chasing things that couldn't love you back," the reflection said, "but they were easier than facing what did." Then the glass rippled, and the mirror went blank. Second stop. The forgotten letter. The next stop was quieter. No announcement this time. Only a faint chiming bell and the hush of mist pressing against the windowless door. Eliot stepped out into a small town. Wooden fences, cobbled streets, a single mailbox standing at the corner like a sentinel. The air smelled of spring. He knew this place. This was where he had grown up. But not everything was as it should be. The colors were slightly washed out, like an old painting. The sky above was too still. Birds perched on telephone lines, but none of them moved. Ahead, he saw his childhood home. The porch light was on. A mailbox waited at the curb, its lid open. Inside was a single weathered envelope addressed to him, in his mother's handwriting. "Eliot Crane, for when you're ready." Hands trembling, he opened it. "My dearest Eliot, I know you won't read this until it's too late for me to say it out loud, but you must know you were never a disappointment. You were always enough. Even when life turned hard for you, I saw the boy who never gave up. I'm proud of you. Come home to yourself. Love always. Mom." The ink dissolved into the page like raindrops. The house behind him flickered, then faded. Only the letter remained. He tucked it into his coat. The passenger with no face. Back on the train, Eliot noticed a new passenger sitting across from him in the lounge, tall, thin, dressed in a dark coat. But the figure had no face. No features, no expression, just smooth, pale skin where a face should be. Eliot didn't speak. Neither did the figure. But a feeling crept into Eliot's chest. Anxiety, doubt, shame. he realized what the faceless figure was. It was every version of himself he had tried to erase, the failures, the humiliations, the silent moments when he wished he could disappear. The figure leaned forward. No mouth but a voice filled the space between them. "You can't run from what you won't name." Then it stood up, turned and walked away, melting into mist before it reached the door. Third stop, the girl with the broken shoe. This stop was brighter, a park in mid-afternoon light. Children's laughter echoed faintly through the trees, though no one could be seen. On a wooden bench, a girl sat alone, one shoe missing. She looked up at Eliot as he approached. "You said you'd come back," she said. He blinked. "Do I know you?" "You did once." Then he remembered. Her name was Clara. They had met at summer camp when they were 12. One day her shoe had broken while running, and he had given her his. She gave him a locket in return, a tiny copper thing he had lost somewhere along the way. She held it out now. "You dropped this," she said. He took it slowly, and just like that, she faded into light. The clock that finally stopped. Back in cabin 3, the brass clock above the door was still ticking backward, but the hands were slowing. The train began to change, ever so slightly. The walls shimmered, the hallway grew dimmer. Eliot could feel the journey nearing something, though what, he couldn't say. He lay back on the bed, the locket still in his hand. His mother's letter folded in his coat pocket, the photo burned into memory. He was not the same man who had walked through the rain. He closed his eyes, and the train kept moving, the room full of apologies. The next carriage wasn't like the others. It was a hall, long, narrow, endless. Dozens of doors lined both sides, each with a name. Some he recognized, some he didn't, but all of them had one thing in common. He owed each of them something, a word, a truth, an apology never spoken. The first door read Marla Jenkins, his college roommate's sister. He had lied to her once, about something small, but it had haunted him for years. He opened the door. Inside was an empty kitchen, rain against the windows. A shadow sat at the table, unmoving. "I'm sorry," Eliot whispered. The shadow turned to face him, and vanished. He moved on. Devon Reed, Jamie Collins, father, himself. One by one the doors opened. One by one he let go. When he reached the final door, it had no name, just a mirror. He stepped through. Final stop, the platform of stillness. The train began to slow. This time there was no chime, no voice, only silence. Outside the door, fog, still, glowing. The conductor stood waiting. "This is the last stop," he said. "What happens now?" Eliot asked. The man smiled. "Now you decide." Eliot stepped onto the platform. There was nothing here, only white ground beneath his feet and silence thick as wool. Then from the mist people began to appear. Not ghosts, not illusions, memories. But they were warm, alive. His mother waving from the porch, Miss Langford smiling in her red cardigan, Clara with her fixed shoe, his younger self no older than 10, holding the book from Ashmore Library. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. He stood among them. And for the first time in years, Eliot felt still, whole. Return. When he opened his eyes, he was back on the street, rain falling gently. The old station behind him, dark, silent, as though it had never opened. But something was different. He wasn't carrying anything, and yet he felt full. His coat was dry, the letter from his mother was gone, but its words stayed in his heart. Eliot Crane walked down Waverly Street. He did not know what the next step would be, but he no longer needed to. He had come home to himself. The end? All right, friends, I'm truly grateful that you've watched this far. I just have a small favor to ask. If you enjoyed the video, please consider supporting us by subscribing to the channel and giving the video a like. Take care and stay well.